Chapter 5 talks about behavioral and social theories of learning. This part of the presentation will focus more on the behavioral side and why students might act the way they act and how we as teachers can influence that. So what is learning? Defined in the book, it is a change in an individual caused by an experience. So something that has happened to an individual has caused them to learn from it and grow from it, and therefore they may or may not do that again. There are two types of learning. The first one is intentional, which can be in a classroom setting. The teacher is giving a lesson that she wants the students to learn, therefore it is intentional. Unintentional, if a child goes to the doctor for the first time and they receive a shot, they have learned to associate that needle or whatever with pain. So the next time that they go to the doctor, they will see the needle and get some kind of anxiety. They usually start crying because they have unintentionally learned that the needle means pain. Okay, what are behavioral learning theories? Behavioral learning theories are an explanation of learning that emphasizes observable change in behavior. There are two main people that deal with behavioral learning. The first one is Ivan Pavlov. He dealt with classical conditioning, and B.F. Skinner, who dealt with operant conditioning. So I'm going to talk about both of these and the experiments that they both did. So the first one is Pavlov. He did the Pavlov dog experiment. This experiment showed how a behavior can be conditioned. So it was the use of a dog and food and trying to associate the ringing of a bell with the same response that the food normally caused. So what they did is they had a plate of food or dog food, and they showed it to the dog, and the dog immediately started to salivate. Well, then they would ring a bell and there was no response. So what they had to do is they had to connect the bell and the food. So they would ring the bell and then they would show the dog the food and the dog would begin to salivate. Eventually they did it so much that the dog started to associate the bell ringing with food. So the conditioned stimulus is the bell, and then the conditioned response was the salivation. So now the dog had been conditioned to, whenever they heard the bell, he would begin to salivate, associating it with the food. And that is classical conditioning. Okay, the Skinner box experiment. Operant conditioning talks about the use of pleasant and unpleasant consequences to change a behavior. So if a behavior is associated with a pleasurable response from it, then the individual most likely do it again. But if there is an unpleasurable consequence for it, then they're probably not going to do it again. So this is talked about in the Skinner box experiment. So Skinner used a box and he either put rats or pigeons in it, and what he did was there was a dispenser that if a bar was pressed, rat food would come out. So the rat would eventually figure out that every time it hit the bar, that food would come out. So there was a pleasurable consequence for that. So the rat continued to do it. And then it talked about the use of electric current. Like if they were to press it and an electric current would happen, the rat would not want to press the bar again. Okay, there are types of reinforcers that are used. We're going to talk about a lot of different reinforcers and how they're used and when it's appropriate to use them and whatnot. So there are two main ones. There's primary and secondary. So primary reinforcers are the things that we need. So food, water, shelter, and all that stuff. Secondary talks about how we don't really have a value for something unless we know what it's for. So the example given was that a young child might not have any value for money if they don't know how to use it. But once they do learn how to use it, they learn that they can buy primary reinforcers, so they can buy the food, the water, so it becomes important. There is a rule that for enforcers, it's called the Premack rule. It's known as promoting behavior by making access to something desirable. So, I mean, if you think about it, it's going to, if you behave a certain way and something good comes out of it, you will do it again and continue to act that way. So, then there are other types of reinforcers, which are intrinsic, which are behaviors that we just want to do for fun. Any hobbies that you might have, just because you want to do it. So then extrinsic are praises or rewards given to motivate people to maybe do a more undesirable task. So if you do this math homework, then you can go play outside. So the student wants to go play outside, therefore they will be motivated to finish the math homework. Okay, the other side of it are known as punishers. These shouldn't be used that often. If reinforcers have failed multiple times is usually when punishers are enacted. So punisher is defined as consequences that weaken behavior. So one type of punisher is a presentation punisher. This is the use of an unpleasant consequence. So if a child behaves a certain way and they are just being yelled at, then the student is more likely to not want to do that again. But it can be ineffective because some students might really enjoy attention from their teachers. Therefore, they will continue to act that way because they know that if they act this way, that the teacher's going to pay attention to me, even if they are yelling at them in a negative way. Another type of punishment is removal punishment, and that is taking away something desirable to the student. Sometimes this can also be ineffective because if a student has to stay in a few minutes or whatever from recess, they will eventually learn that the 3 minutes or whatever is not that bad, so they're not going to really stop engaging in what they were doing. But I mean, removal punishment is taking away something that the student wants. Okay, and this is just a little diagram that explains the difference between positive and negative reinforcers and punishment. I'm going to upload the PowerPoint separately in case you can't really see it, so that way you can refer to it back when we're doing other assignments. Okay, there's one thing that's really important when reinforcing, and that is the immediacy of the consequences. If a reinforcer is not done immediately, then the child will not associate the behavior with the consequence. So an example given is that a student might want immediate praise for a job well done rather than wait a week later to receive that grade. That way it increases the idea that the student will know what behavior is expected of them, and if it was good for them to do that or bad for them to do that. If you wait too long, they will forget what they really did. So it's important to make sure that it's immediate. Okay. One thing that is used, so shaping uses a lot of reinforcement. Reinforcement along the way is what shaping is. So if there's a big task at hand, it's important to break it down and reinforce as you go along. A child might not be willing to complete the big task if they aren't getting acknowledged for doing the work that they are putting in now. This also helps because that way if they aren't reaching certain individual goals, you can reinforce that and work with them so that when it comes time to the bigger goal as a whole, they are understanding the material and they know that they have done everything right along the way, so therefore their end result is going to be desirable. So when a new material is being learned, it is important that reinforcers are constantly given. If you start to withdraw reinforcers, the behavior will weaken. There's a type of extinction, and it's called extinction burst. This, however, can be a good thing if the teacher really sticks it out and is tough about it. Because let's say a child is calling out answers in class and not raising their hand like the desired behavior would be. Well, the teacher might ignore that child until they learn to raise their hand. However, at first, the child will maybe call out answers more because they are trying to get the attention of their teacher. That's called an extinction burst. It's a quick bringing up of the same behavior all at once. But if the teacher does stick it out, however, and continues to ignore that child, the child will eventually learn that they're not going to be called on until they raise their hand. If the teacher were to give in to the student and eventually answer them when they're calling out, then the student would learn that if they call out answers enough times, that then their teacher will answer them. So it's very important that when this happens, that the teacher does stick it out till the end. Okay, there are schedules of reinforcement. Reinforcement schedules are known as the frequency with which reinforcers are given. The first type is fixed ratio. This depends on how many tasks are needed in order to get a reinforcement. So let's say 10 things need to be done before one reinforcement is given, is known as a fixed ratio. Variable ratio is the number of behavior required for reinforcement is unpredictable. So you never know when you will be reinforced. You might have to complete 10 this time or 15 the next time, but it'll be randomized by the teacher itself. Fixed interval deals more with the student, and it's a certain time for reinforcement. So their activity, how much effort they put in will increase when deadlines are near. So a student might not do a whole lot of work before and during the school year, but the final exam comes and now all of a sudden they have to study. Then the last one is variable interval. So the time between reinforcers vary. If teacher is walking around a classroom, they will see that a student is on task and they may or may not reinforce that behavior. So it keeps the students on their toes because if a teacher's walking around, they want to make sure they're doing their work so they do get that positive reinforcement. Okay, the importance of maintenance. Maintenance is used when first learning a task, like I talked about when I was referring to extinction. So it's important to reinforce a certain behavior until that item is learned. So the example is when a child first learns to read, you really need to keep reinforcing until they have mastered the skill and they have learned it. Then the need for reinforcement can be diminished, but it will not become extinct because they have fully learned that task. Okay, now we're going to talk about the role of antecedents in the classroom, or just in general. There are 3 different types, but antecedent is something that either causes a certain behavior or happens because of a certain behavior. The first type is cueing, and that is an event that precedes a behavior. So let's say you are outside with your students, and you may encourage them that they can talk loudly and use their outside voices, but then you go back inside or into the library and you need them to lower their voices and act in a certain way. So the environment really has changed the type of behavior that is desirable. Discrimination is the use of these cues, signals, or information to know when behavior is likely to be reinforced. Sometimes you will know, an example is if you want something, let's say, most students or most people know like who to go to. Either you're going to go to mom or you're going to go to dad, depending on what you're asking for. I know a lot of people use that. Or if you're trying to ask the teacher for something, if they're in a good mood that day, it's probably the best time to ask. So it's discriminating on when to do certain behaviors. Generalization is the transfer of behaviors learned to a different situation. I talked about it more on the next slide. Okay, so there are techniques for increasing generalization. Generalization is mainly using one thing that you might have learned in one classroom and apply it to all classrooms. An example is maybe test-taking skills. So I have this little LEARN acronym up here. So they might be able to take those skills and apply it to all classrooms, which is known as generalization. Okay, and so to finish it off, I have 2 interesting articles. The first one, I'm going to upload the PowerPoint, so if you want to look at them separately, you can. The first one really gives a lot of examples of how behavioral learning theories are used in the classroom. It talks about how, like one example is that a child has been reinforced and learned enough that if I were to stand close to them, that they should be doing their work. So just by you being there, they have learned that, oh, I'm supposed to be on task. The second one is also really interesting. It talks about the use of these theories in the marketplace, like not just in the classroom. Whenever you're like buying things at a store, let's say you try a new product. Well, they use like maybe, oh, there's a coupon on the box, so I'm going to want to do this. Or, so it's mainly whenever you have a new product put out there, they're going to put things and incentives like buy 2, get 1 free on there until they have sold enough to where like people enjoy the product and they like the product, so they're going to buy it regardless of if there's a coupon on it and whatnot. So it kind of ties in everything on how not only in the classroom but behavior is learned and how it relates to the real world. Okay, I'm not sure if you can see this or not, but I found this picture and it kind of ties in everything that we talked about. So it says, it is very important to find what motivates students, use high levels of reinforcement when skills are being taught, and then lessen the frequency of the reinforcement as the skill is used independently by the student. So when we talked about maintenance and the importance of reinforcement when they're first learning it, eventually the student will learn how to work or do a certain task independently, and therefore less reinforcement is used. So that's all I have for you. Thank you.